Alright, stay with me here because this is crucial. Last night, something happened in the United States Senate that hasn't happened in an extremely long time. Republican senators, not Democrats, not independents, Republicans voted against their own president on one of the most fundamental questions a democracy can ask. Who gets to start a war? And when Donald Trump found out what happened, he picked up the phone, called Senator Susan Collins of Maine, and according to multiple sources, he unleashed a profanity-laced tirade so intense that veteran lawmakers, people who have been in Washington for decades, people who have seen everything, were left truly stunned. Now, here's why this matters beyond the apparent. In 1973, after years of watching presidents drag this country into military conflicts without congressional approval, after Vietnam, after Cambodia, after secret bombings and body bags, and a generation of young Americans sent to die for decisions made in back rooms, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. It was supposed to be a safeguard, a constitutional safety rail, a pledge that never again would one person alone decide to send Americans into combat. That law sat on the books for 50 years, and last night Republicans invoked it against their own president. Let me say that again because I need you to grasp what we're watching. The president's own party is now moving to legally restrain his ability to use military force. And they're doing it because of something this president said out loud in public where everyone could hear him. He suggested military action against Greenland. Greenland, which is not an unclaimed territory, which is not some disputed island in the middle of nowhere. Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is a NATO ally. Denmark is a country we are treaty-bound legally, formally on paper to defend. And the President of the United States suggested taking it by force. Senator Chris Murphy framed this out in terms so blunt they should be taught in civics classes. Any military action against Greenland would hypothetically trigger Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the collective defense provision, the promise that an attack on one is an attack on all. We would be attacking an ally. We would be at war with NATO. We would be at war with ourselves. And Republican senators heard that. They did the math. They looked at their constitutional oaths. And for once enough of them said, we need to draw a line. So they voted. And Trump responded the way he always responds when anyone anywhere dares to tell him no. Not with persuasion, not with negotiation, not with the tools of democratic politics, with fury, with threats, with intimidation. Now, here's where this gets really interesting and really dangerous. At the exact same moment this internal revolt was unfolding, at the precise moment Republican senators were voting to constrain presidential war powers, this White House announced a national emergency over Venezuelan oil assets. Now, on the surface, this sounds like it might be about energy security. That's certainly how it's being framed. But when you actually look at what this emergency declaration does, when you examine the practical benefits and who they flow to, something becomes very clear very quickly. The immediate beneficiaries aren't American consumers. They're multinational energy companies. The timeline for any meaningful impact is distant. The justification is thin. So why do it? Why now? Because here's what emergency powers actually do. They allow presidents to bypass Congress. They centralize authority. They shift the conversation. And right now, this administration desperately needs to shift the conversation because on top of the war powers revolt, on top of the Greenland insanity, there's something else happening. Something that's been building quietly for weeks. The transparency promises are falling apart. Remember the document releases, the promises of disclosure, the assurances that this administration would bring hidden information to light, that transparency would be a demonstration of integrity. Those releases have stalled, deadlines have slipped, the urgency of the rhetoric has completely failed to match the reality of execution. And lawmakers have noticed. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has begun publicly describing these delays. He's emphasizing timelines. He's noting compliance requirements. He's documenting the gap between what was promised and what has been delivered. And formal requests for Inspector General review have been filed. Now let me be clear about what that means. An IG review request isn't an accusation. It's not a claim that crimes occurred. It's something more foundational than that. It's an acknowledgement that something in the process isn't working. That the machinery of government has broken down somewhere. That records need to be examined by people whose job is to examine record. And for a president who treats control as essential to survival, that kind of oversight is existentially threatening because oversight produces documentation. And documentation doesn't care about spin. Documentation doesn't respond to phone calls or threats or loyalty tests. Documentation just exists quietly, permanently recording what actually happened. Okay, I need you to zoom out with me here because the headlines aren't capturing what this actually is. This isn't just political infighting. This isn't just a bad week for the White House. This is a stress test of American constitutional democracy happening in real time. And to understand why, you need to understand something about how power works in this country. The presidency is not a throne. It never was. The founders had just fought a war against a king. They weren't about to create a new one. So, they designed a system built on friction, deliberately slow, deliberately cumbersome, requiring negotiation and compromise and coalition building. They distributed power across branches, across institutions, across competing interests. And for 250 years, that system has functioned not because every president respected it willingly, but because enough people within the system enforced it. What we're watching right now is a test of whether that enforcement still works. Because Trump doesn't just push against limits, he denies their legitimacy. Entirely. When he suggests military force against allied territory, when he indicates that treaties are suggestions rather than obligations, when he frames his own judgment as the only relevant standard, he's not just being aggressive. He's articulating a theory of presidential power that is fundamentally incompatible with constitutional governance. And here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. This isn't just about Trump. Whatever you think of him personally, love him, hate him, something in between, he won't be president forever. Eventually, there will be a different person in that office, and that person will inherit every precedent that gets set now. Every power that goes unchallenged, every norm that gets broken without consequence, every emergency declaration that Congress waves through without scrutiny, every threat against an ally that doesn't trigger immediate, overwhelming pushback. It all becomes part of the toolkit available to whoever comes next, Democrat, Republican, someone we haven't heard of yet. Presidents don't have party affiliations. They just exist, and once they exist, they are very, very hard to undo. This is what the framers understood. This is what constitutional scholars have been warning about for years, and this is what's finally breaking through to some Republican lawmakers. The realization that protecting the institution sometimes means opposing the person who currently runs it. Let me show you the pattern, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Challenge comes. Escalation follows. Crisis language drowns out oversight. Congressional pushback on war powers escalate the rhetoric about national security threat. Questions about stalled transparency. Declare an emergency about oil. Internal party revolt. Frame it as establishment betrayal. Demand loyalty tests. Pick up the phone and scream at Susan Collins. It's not random. It's systematic. And the system serves a purpose, keeping everyone moving too fast to focus on any single issue long enough to demand real answers. But here's what's different about this moment. Congress isn't just an audience anymore. At least parts of it aren't. The procedural machinery is starting to engage war powers resolutions, oversight requests, inspector general reviews. These are the boring, technical, unglamorous tools of constitutional accountability. They don't make for exciting television. They don't trend on social media. They don't generate the kind of conflict that drives cable news ratings. But they work. They work slowly. They work quietly. They accumulate documentation that doesn't go away. And they're being activated. Now, I know this can feel abstract. War powers, emergency declarations, congressional procedure. What does any of this actually mean for regular people trying to live their lives? Here's the answer. Everything. When a president can unilaterally commit military force, it's your children who get deployed, your neighbors, your community members. When emergency powers get abused, it's your tax dollars that get redirected without your representatives having any say. When transparency fails, it's your right to know what your government is doing that errors. And when trust in institutions breaks down, really breaks down, the consequences ripple through everything. Markets become volatile because investors can't predict policy. Businesses hesitate to hire because the rules might change overnight. Allies reconsider their partnerships because they're not sure American commitments mean anything. Your retirement account dips because markets are nervous. Your cousin's deployment gets extended because foreign policy is chaotic. Your small business struggles because supply chains are disrupted by unpredictable trade actions. These connections aren't always visible, but they're real. The rules that govern presidential power exist to create stability, to ensure that no matter who holds the office, there are boundaries that protect the system from being captured by any single individual's impulses. When those boundaries get tested, when they might actually break, everyone feels it eventually. So, where does this go? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how this plays out is not being straight with you. But I can tell you what I'm watching for. I'm watching to see whether the Republicans who voted for that war powers resolution continue to hold that line, or whether they quietly return to alignment once the immediate controversy fades, once the primary threats start, once the base applies pressure. Because that will tell us whether this moment represents genuine institutional reassertion or just temporary turbulence before the system capitulates again. History suggests institutions can reassert themselves when enough people choose to defend them. But history also shows that requires sustained effort, not isolated votes, not momentary courage that evaporates under pressure. Sustained, ongoing, uncomfortable effort. The next several months will reveal which pattern this follows. Here's what you need to take away from this one. The revolt is coming from inside the party. Democrats opposing Trump is expected. It's priced in. Republicans doing so on fundamental questions of war powers and presidential authority. That's a structural shift that wasn't happening 6 months ago. Something has changed in the calculation for at least some of them that matters. 2 emergency powers are being used as political tools, not policy responses. When you declare emergencies at moments of maximum political pressure, when the practical benefits are distant and uncertain, when the timing correlates with oversight, scrutiny, and internal party conflict, that pattern tells a story, and the story is about controlling narrative, not addressing genuine crisis. 3. What happens now sets precedent for everything that comes after. This isn't just about one president. Every norm broken, without consequence, becomes available to the next president and the next and the next. Defending the system sometimes means opposing the person running it. That realization is what's finally breaking through to some Republican lawmakers. Whether it breaks through to enough of them, whether it lasts, that's the question this moment is asking. I want to leave you with something bigger than just this story. What we're watching isn't a single crisis. It's an ongoing question about what kind of country America chooses to be. Are we a nation of laws where power is genuinely constrained by constitutional limits? Or are we something else? A nation where laws exist on paper but bend in practice whenever someone powerful enough decides to push against them? That question doesn't get answered once. It gets answered over and over again through thousands of decisions made by lawmakers and judges and voters and citizens who pay attention when it would be easier to look away. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It never was. It's a project, one that requires active participation from people who understand the stake. And right now, in this moment, the stakes could not be higher. I'll see you tomorrow.